Okay, welcome back to the Skymaster F-5E 1/6 scale EDF conversion project. So you can see I've got the fuselage now waiting to be worked on. It's pretty clear that I don't know if I mentioned this in the first video, but I did hack off the back end of the fuselage. I just found a panel line and just cut that with a Zona saw. It really makes it much easier to work on a model when you're trying to get in and work on bulkheads and install a fan, especially in the aft section like this. It does have a nice access panel, but having I'm going to make this detachable, so I'm going to eventually lay up a flange inside the fuselage here with fiberglass, and that'll be detachable, so anytime I need to work on the fan or pull out the thrust tube, installing or working on the fan and the thrust tube with that rear section removable is so much easier. I've done this on other composite jets as well. It's just sometimes you just need a little more access. And there's nothing really going on back here. There's nothing really structural. This is essentially just a exhaust area. There's nothing that mounts in here. So it's just along for the ride. All the structural stuff is happening here. I would have loved to have used the scale detach point. This diagonal line here is where the back of the real F5 or T38, how that removes to access the engines, but that would have been a whole deal to do that and separate the servo mounting areas. It's just too much trouble. So we just cut it off straight. So I'll get into the elevator mounting and eventually the fan mounting area here. Pretty simple. This is, I guess, pretty typical of an early Skymaster kit. Just very rudimentary bulkheads. There's no bearing, cool CNC bearing mounts or whatever. It's actually just these holes for bronze oilite bushings to go into. One on the outside and one on the inside. So it's a very kind of crude and old school method, but it works fine. So you can see here I have a hole. I've done some cleanup already. Some of these holes were not very round, and first of all I had to remove these bushings. So to use the old school method I use is just take a large wattage soldering iron, just heat them up a little bit until they start to smoke a little, and usually the epoxy that's holding them in, especially sort of very lightly applied epoxy of the Skymaster kit, they just pull right out once they heat up. So I did that for four places here, inside and outside bushings, and then I also did that for the two bushings that hold in the vertical stab. So, and I have a friend of mine who's helping me machine I bought new bushing stock, and I'm going to machine all new bushings and go with some new material there. So I've done, like I said, a little bit of cleanup work already. I drilled these lightning holes. I know this seems silly, like, oh, how much weight are you going to save there? What I've learned with EDF stuff is every little bit counts, because every gram does add up in the end and makes for a better flying model. I mean, where you can, I try to remove material. So you'll see that throughout this build. If lightning holes drive you crazy, then you're not going to want to watch this much, but I mean, I just do it where it's easy. I'm not going to try to go in here and lighten up the stock primary bulkheads and all that stuff. I don't want to mess with that. It's got carbon plate on it. It's where I can know and it's easy, I try to save some weight. So, okay, so getting back to the build, we've got these two main stressed bulkheads, really just one full bulkhead and then a shorter bulkhead. I had to already, I did fit the thrust tube, the bifurcated thrust tube, and I had to remove that much material. This used to kind of go straight across here because the turbine bifurcated tube's a little not as tall. But since I'm mounting the fan right here, there's some height to the exhaust here. So I had to remove some material. So I planned to double this up and add another piece of ply, a partial bulkhead like this back in over the top of this one. And some modelers I saw that had this same kit, they would even box in. They would just, when they're done, they would apply some wood across the bottom here. I may or may not do that. If I double up this bulkhead, that shouldn't be required. So essentially I'm just waiting for my bushings and I can actually start to remount these. I'm going to have to, it looks like from the factory this was originally jigged. It's just they would put a rod through here the same size as the elevator axles, and it would go straight through, and that's how they would align their bushings and get proper alignment. Because it appears all the anhedral angle, as you know, if you know about F5s, they've got that characteristic anhedral tail. That's supposed to be all captured here, and then the other angles that match up with the fuselage are captured in the elevator. So I believe the bushings were designed to be straight across, and that's what it looks like. I am going to have to modify that a little bit because the stock anhedral angle of the stabs is not correct. It's a couple degrees too shy. So that's another reason why these Skymaster F-5s always look so weird, is because the wings have anhedral, which they shouldn't, and the stabs don't have enough anhedral. So it really does, it always kind of caught my eye as a weird deal. So I'll be correcting that by making a different jig to go in here and give the stabs the correct angle. So that's the elevator setup. And as far as the control linkage, the stock linkage is a pretty small aluminum clamp-on style horn with no lock or no keying features, which I don't like that. I may use these, but I'd counter drill across the axle with a small pin, just like a 16th inch pin or something that would go through this once they're aligned, or a very thin screw that could be removed, just to make sure these cannot slip at all. They're not real long horns. They could be much longer. There's no reason they couldn't be and fit in here. So I may end up just making these that have at least one more hole length, add about another 15 or 20% torque. That would be to make me feel better about the full flying stabs and having enough torque to not have any issues with the elevators, even though we've got servos in here that have, I think, 250 or 300 ounces of torque. Anyways, that's just kind of my overkill stuff. Over here we got the RC Geek on. I'm stoked for him, having flown the Skyray, the Ford. I saw that model in stages of being built over the years, so that's awesome to see that flying. It's good to have a little inspiration going on in the background here when I'm building. I like to see what other people are doing. Awesome projects that are out there. Anyway, so the other thing I want to fix in here is these vertical stab mounting blocks are pretty weak. Number one, you can see there's really no glue attaching this block to the couple little fillets, but missing glue attaching this to this bulkhead, which I did. I sanded this out a little bit to make sure there was room for the fan, but these blocks to me are just not adequate for supporting that vertical stab on this jet. It seems sketchy to me. They did have bushings in them, which I took out, but they're just basically the same kind of a bushing, just a bronze bushing that'll slide in here. And that was essentially it, with a screw coming in, a threaded hole on the spar coming down out of the stab. They'd go into here, and then a screw goes in and holds it in. That's just not enough support. I feel like just overall, it's just not enough to make me feel like it should. I mean, the stab is big on this plane. The stab is bigger than the wing on most of my 90mm foam jets, so it needs some support. So I'm gonna definitely work on strengthening this area up on the top of the fuselage, stiffen that up a little bit, and not add a lot of weight. But from my calculations, this thing probably will end up needing a little bit of tail weight anyways. But I really will feel better if that's more solid and the elevator mounts are more solid, just peace of mind. So I'll be doing some work in here, doing some work back here on these bulkheads. I already worked a little bit on the elevator servo areas here. I put a little bit of plywood in around because they were basically too large to fit the servos. Now the high-tech servos I have will fit right in there, fit nice and snug. And then of course we have to get to actually making the mounting for the fan in here. So the fan is going to sit right about here. That's about the location of the fan. So it's going to be a little bit of work to make some plates to extend out essentially from the elevator servo trays, and then there'll also be some little mini bulkheads that connect these extensions down to the fuselage and to the forward bulkhead up here to make sure we're getting good mechanical strength from the fan mounts to the rest of the fuselage, so we're not overstressing anything. The other thing we have is our thrust tubes. I've made a couple thrust tubes. I mentioned that in the first video. Those slide in here pretty easily. The fan goes in, and give me just 1 second here. I can actually fit this together. So there we go. There's the fan mounted to the thrust tube. You can see there's just clearance underneath the bulkheads here, and the thrust tube's coming out the back. Bifurcated thrust tube. It'll be somewhere around, right around here. That's what it should look like. So anyways, now I've just got to get some mounts in here so that we can actually get this thing rigged up and I can actually do all the final sizing for the rest of the ductwork. But overall, it's looking pretty good. Some of these bulkheads are missing some glue, so I'll go in and touch that up. And overall, I think it's going to work fine. It's got just enough room back here for the 120. There's just about a 1/4 inch of clearance on the top and bottom of the bulkheads. And yeah, so I will get to work on those parts and check back in.